All right, we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to say welcome everyone to the Indiana Horticulture Conference virtual webinar series. It's not the way we intended to see everyone this year, but we're glad that we're still able to have a really nice lineup of events. So today we'll be doing the part of the small fruit track, and there'll be 3 sessions. My name is Miranda Purcell. I'm the Viticulture Extension Specialist here at Purdue, and I'll be giving the first talk about vineyard sustainability. Next up, we'll have Eric Koch from Bird Control Group, and he'll be talking about bird control strategies. He'll begin his talk at 2:30. And then lastly, we'll have Dr. Elizabeth Long, who's an entomologist here at Purdue, and she'll be talking about the spotted lanternfly. All right, so as I mentioned, my name is Miranda Purcell, the Viticulture Extension Specialist here at Purdue University. And today I'm giving a talk with some tips on how to improve vineyard sustainability. And I got the idea to give this talk based on a needs assessment that I did shortly after starting this position in last spring. And there were a number of growers who reported sustainability being the number one topic that they were interested in learning more about. Sustainability is also a personal passion of mine, so I was really excited to put this talk together and be able to work with folks on improving sustainability in their vineyards. So just to give you a layout of what I'll be going through today, I'm going to talk about what I mean when I say sustainability. And then I'm going to talk about how we can be more sustainable when it comes to soil management, nutrient management, irrigation management, weed management, as well as pest and disease management. And I wanted to make note that a lot of the information that I'm including in our talk today is based on a workbook called Vine Balance that was produced by Cornell University. And this is a really neat, they call it a grower self-assessment workbook. And it was designed to provide guidance in evaluating and adopting best management practices that minimize environmental impacts, reduced economic risks, and protect worker health and safety. So I've included links on lots of my slides because this isn't going to be a one-stop shop. There is a lot of information that I'm not going to be able to delve into today, but I wanted to make you aware that there are lots of resources out there. That being said, if you're interested in this presentation so that you can have access to the links, I'm happy to share it at the end of today's session. So when I'm talking about sustainability, I feel like a lot of times we immediately assume we're talking about environmental sustainability. However, there are many components of sustainability as that Vine Balance workbook alluded to, and it includes economic sustainability as well as social sustainability. And I like to think about the word itself. We are talking about ways to be able to sustain your vineyard for its lifespan and be able to sustain your business. And then when we do break down into the environmental aspects of it, I feel like a lot of folks assume that if they're not organic or biodynamic, that they're not sustainable. And that's why I like this little Venn diagram of sorts that shows that organic and biodynamic are only a small part of the sustainability world. There are tons of ways that you can be sustainable beyond that and in addition to that. And so if you're not organic or biodynamic, I want you to know that I still think there are things that you can do to help the environment and your vineyard and your business. And I just wanted to highlight a few. Obviously, sustainability is a hot topic, and I have just a few articles listed here that have been in the news recently about sustainability in vineyards. And I really like the way that Vines Analytics put it. And they said sustainable wine grape growing is a journey, not a destination. And so I hope that today you'll learn you'll get an idea of maybe 1 or 2 things you could try. And if that's what you take away, I'll consider that a success, because I don't want us to think that if we're not 100% sustainable, that we're not good enough. So every step that you can make in the right direction is a success. And then the Wine Institute also made a statement that sustainable vineyard and winery practices conserve water and maintain healthy soil, protect air and water quality, enhance relations with employees and communities, preserve local ecosystems and wildlife habitat, and improve the economic vitality of vineyards and wineries. So that just, again, shines light on the fact that when we're talking about sustainability, the environment is definitely included, but it goes above and beyond that. So we're going to start off by talking about soil management. And soil management is required whether you are an aspiring vineyard owner or manager and you don't have a vineyard yet. It's important to understand and plant your vineyard in a place where you know about the soil. But soil management is also important if you've had a vineyard for years. And so it's important for the lifespan of your vineyard. And it's important to maintain the productivity of your vines, but also to reduce runoff and prevent leaching of pesticides and nutrients. I'm not sure if folks can do a show of hands if you own a vineyard or if you work in a vineyard, if anyone could do a show of hands. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see them all, but just to get an idea of what we're working with here. Awesome. And beyond that, I'm wondering if anyone has heard of the USDA's NRCS Web Soil Survey. So that's a little bit of what I'm showing on this slide here. Oh, sorry, I keep clicking. But this is a really great place to start. But like I said, even if you already have an established vineyard, I would still highly recommend going into this system. And you put in your address and it gives you a map and you can locate where your vineyard is and you kind of select the area just around it. And the web soil survey can give you a breakdown of the types of soils you have in your vineyard, the slope you have at different parts of your vineyard, and this can help you determine the runoff and the leaching potential of pesticides and fertilizers in your vineyard. So again, there's the link at the bottom. If you've never done that before, it's free and it can be very informative. Once you know a little bit more about your soil, you can consider preventing runoff by installing diversions, buffer strips, or maybe considering tile drainage, or considering some vineyard floor management practices. You may also consider delaying pesticide and fertilizer applications if rain is in the forecast, or you may even split those fertilizer applications so there's not as much of the fertilizer going out all at once to reduce the runoff potential. If your soil is heavily compacted, you will want to address that. And you can also consider applying mulch to the middle of the rows, especially in sloped areas, to prevent erosion. So this photo here on the right is showing straw mulch being used in the row middle of a vineyard in New York. Cover crops is another thing that often comes to mind when we're talking about managing our soil. And I've listed a number of benefits here, and I've bolded the ones that we might be most familiar with, but cover crops can help prevent erosion, and they can help us manage the vigor of the vine. They can help improve water filtration, and they can even help reduce mowing and provide traction for equipment and workers. They can maintain populations of beneficial fungi and help control insects, diseases, and nematodes. So if you're in an area that has a high erosion potential, here are some great cover crop resources to consider. This list is from a resource out of Cornell University, and it's a number of cover crops, and it breaks down the planting dates, the life cycle, the cold hardiness zone, how they tolerate heat, drought, and shade, pH. And there's also a chart that shows you when you can plan to plant these cover crops and at what seeding rate would be recommended. And so there's a link to access these charts as well as more information if you're interested in cover crops. Going along with managing our soil, we also can talk about increasing the sustainability of how we manage our nutrients. Nutrients, whether they're in excess or in deficiency, can affect yield and the quality of our fruit. And I think it's really important to test your soil and also your tissue and use these two methods to guide your nutrient management decisions. So some folks may be familiar with soil sampling. I don't know if you want to do a show of hands if you've ever sampled your soil before, but that can help you determine the availability of nutrients to the vines. The availability of nutrients to the vines, and you can also get information on the amount of organic matter, the pH and microbial activity and cation exchange capacity in your soil. So this chart on the right shows the annual nutrient demand of high-yielding Concord vines. So we have our nutrients listed on the left-hand column, and you can see the annual demand in the first column. And the second column is the amount of nutrients that are carried over in the vines to the next year. And then the annual soil nutrient demand is what we're left with. So that just goes to show that there may be nutrients that need to be replaced in coming years. In addition to sampling your soil, there's another really great way that you can learn about how nutrients are being accessed in your vineyard, and that is tissue sampling. So tissue sampling can help you determine whether or not the nutrients in the soil are actually making their way to the vine in proper amounts. And when we talk about sampling the tissue, we're usually sampling the leaf blades or the petioles, and this is done either at bloom time or veraison. Both of these soil sampling and tissue sampling practices can be done, or it's recommended to be done every 2 to 3 years. And they can especially be done if you're experiencing some sort of problem area and you want to figure out if nutrient access or availability could be the problem. So that being said, if you've ever done a soil test or you are considering doing one, here's a breakdown of the desired soil test ranges for grapes. You can see pH, organic matter, and a number of the most important nutrients listed there. I've included the link to this resource, and I also included some soil testing labs that are commonly used. The first of which is A&L Great Lakes Lab in Fort Wayne, and then you can see a lab at Cornell, and as well as Ward Laboratories in Nebraska. So those are great ways to get started on the soil testing train. And transitioning to testing that tissue again, here's a breakdown of the percent of nutrients you should expect to see if you test the petioles at bloom time. And then if you test the petioles in late summer, or that would be your veraison time frame. So I didn't have time to go through it today, but I've included a link to a petiole sampling video from Cornell University, and then the Ohio State University put together a really great step-by-step guide on how to collect those petioles or leaf blades and how to go about packaging them up and shipping them off to a soil testing lab. So both of these methods of assessing the nutrients in your vineyard are important, and they should be used to base your nutrient management decisions off of. Like I said, having too little nutrients or too many nutrients can negatively affect your yield and fruit quality. Also, I feel like a lot of people are in the habit of automatically applying the same fertilizer every single year without knowing whether their vines actually need it. And so, first of all, that excess fertilizer can contaminate ground and surface water, but it can also it can also be a huge chunk of money that may be going to waste. And so the best way to go about it is to do these tests and understand whether you're using your money in a way that is benefiting your vineyard. We're going to skip the irrigation section, but in terms of weed management, I thought this was really interesting, but crop losses due to poor weed management are higher than losses due to diseases and insects combined. So that just goes to show that we shouldn't overlook managing our weeds. And some considerations we can make are, first of all, just being able to properly identify weeds. And then after we're able to identify, properly choosing the pre-emergent and post-emergent herbicides, and also their timing is critical. We can also consider using non-chemical control methods such as tilling. It's also important to ensure that our weed sprayers are cared for properly and calibrated and cleaned. We can consider using cover crops and mulches in the row middles to reduce our weed populations. And it's also important to focus on controlling your weeds during these critical development stages of the grapevine. So the grapevine is growing most rapidly between bloom and veraison, and that's the time point when competition from weeds would be most detrimental. So if you have limited time, labor, or money, you can focus on controlling weeds during that stage and get the most bang for your buck. So like I said, this comes down to knowing how to identify weed species. I've included a few links down here at the bottom, but if you could do a show of hands if you've ever used the iNaturalist app. It's free on your phones, and I talked with Steve Myers, our weed specialist here at Purdue, and he said he uses it. While it may not give the most accurate answer every single time, he said it usually gives him helps him to narrow it down to the right answer. And so that's a great resource if you're just getting started or if you want a leg up in identifying your weed species. And then I've included some online guides. There's a Purdue Master Gardener Weed Guide, as well as a guide from the University of Missouri. And then if you like the hard copy, I've listed some options there as well. So after educating yourself on weed species, it's important to scout for weeds at least 3 times during the season. Not only that, but we want to record and map any infestations we might have so that in future years, we can know which areas we need to target and when to prevent the weeds from sprouting in future years. We also want to make sure that like I mentioned, sprayers are calibrated and serviced before the start of each season or even before the start of each spray. And it's important to also rotate our herbicides to prevent resistance. And now on to our last main section for the day, pest and disease management. And there are a number of factors that can help us control pests and diseases, beginning with proper site selection. So if you already are working in an established vineyard, that's kind of out of the question to pick it up and move it to a different location. But if you're just starting out, now's the time to do your homework and do your research and really try to find the best site possible, because increasing airflow is the most important aspect of preventing pests and diseases, because they really thrive in those moist, humid environments. So beyond site selection, it's important to consider the susceptibility or resistance of different varieties and also to diseases, and also their sensitivity to fungicides. Beyond that, as with weeds, it's important to be able to correctly identify insects and diseases so that you can manage them properly. Monitoring weather conditions can always help. And then it comes down to choosing the appropriate control method also, and making sure that you're applying that control method at the appropriate time. So a lot of these ideas are part of what we call integrated pest management. which is abbreviated as IPM, and that comes down to effectively and economically controlling pests while minimizing environmental risk. So just another note on site selection, most disease-causing fungi thrive in damp environments. So if you have any amount of leaf wetness or humidity that can contribute to disease, like I said, promoting air movement is one of the best ways to reduce the incidence of disease. And this can be done with site selection if you choose a site with a prevailing wind, but there's also some ways beyond that. There's many canopy management techniques, such as shoot thinning or leaf pulling, that can be used to open up the canopy and get that air circulation going and prevent disease incidents. Another thing to keep in mind is that insects and diseases from wild grapes can also infect your vineyard, and this most likely comes into play if your vines are near woodlots, because if there are wild grapes there, they can easily transfer insects and diseases between the wild grapes and your vineyard. So some things to keep on the back of your mind, but variety selection is something I really want to focus on today. We know when you're choosing a variety that there's a number of factors that go into play. Site selection, cold hardiness, market considerations, obviously, but the two I want to focus on today are the resistance to fungal diseases and the sensitivity to fungicides. So disease resistance and susceptibility is extremely important, because if you're interested in organic or sustainable farming, there are a very limited number of organic fungicides available. And also, when it comes to susceptibility, there are many potential negative impacts of repeated copper and sulfur sprays on some varieties. And what it comes down to is that if diseases aren't controlled on grapes, there's a potential for complete crop loss. And these factors are especially important in our climate because the presence of disease may not only affect your crop of the current year, but this can reduce the winter hardiness of the vines and could affect your crop in future years. So I wanted to break down disease susceptibility into 3 categories. We have our American and Labrusca varieties, which are susceptible to a smaller complex of diseases than our vinifera varieties. And a lot of what's being planted in Indiana today are hybrid varieties, a mix between the American and Labrusca and the vinifera, and their resistance varies greatly from variety to variety and from disease to disease. So I wanted to let you know that this resource is available. I've included the link there, but you can also find it just by typing in grape varieties for Indiana. And it lists a number of varieties. And then what we see here along the top are abbreviations for many diseases. So WH is actually winter hardiness, but BR is black rot, downy mildew, powdery mildew, botrytis, and phomopsis. And so the number of plus signs indicates the susceptibility of that variety to that disease. And so if you're interested in minimizing the amount of spraying on your vineyard, consider planting a variety that is not susceptible to some of the major grapevine diseases. Also, you can see here on the far right, this chart also shows the sensitivity of varieties to sulfur. So sulfur is commonly used to control diseases, and it may be harder to control diseases in a variety that is susceptible to sulfur. I also wanted to let folks know that the Midwest Fruit Pest Management Guide is a great resource. We can do a show of hands of how many folks are aware that this exists. Cool. There are a lot of universities that update this. Oh, sorry. Every year, Purdue is one of the, I think is the lead university. And there's a ton of great information. I've included the link up here at the top. But one of the things I wanted to highlight was this chart of grape insect pests based on grape growth stage. So this can give you an idea of what insects you should keep an eye out for at the beginning stages of grape growth, the middle stages of grape growth, and getting close to harvest. Also, if you're just starting out, this guide also gives a breakdown of a foundation fungicide program for early control of grape diseases. So if you're not sure where to start, this would be a great place to build off of. And to wrap up the pest and disease management section, scout regularly. I can't emphasize that enough, but like I mentioned, you can also utilize canopy management techniques to reduce disease and make sure your sprayers are cleaned and calibrated. And one more quick note, you don't have to worry about every little black spot you may see on a leaf. It's important to explore and figure out what's going on, but unless it's affecting the quality of your vines, you may not have to take any action. So be sure you consider the economic threshold of when a spray is necessary versus when it's almost just a cosmetic defect. And I've included a link down here to a scouting worksheet that can be useful when you're scouting through the vineyard. And then just to sum everything up today, one of the things that we can all do to better our vineyards is to educate ourselves on common weeds, pests, and diseases so that we know what we're working with. On top of that, we can scout regularly during the season, whether it's ourselves or whether we assign that task to someone else. But not only scouting, but keeping records of everything so that next year when we're experiencing the same problem, we can come back and say, okay, this is how I dealt with it last year, or it either worked or didn't work. And now I'm going to move forward differently or in the same way this year. Calibrating, servicing, and cleaning our equipment regularly to make sure they're all spraying accurately and efficiently, and doing soil or nutrient tissue testing on a regular basis every 1 to 3 years. If you are interested in a sort of sustainability certification, there's a program called SIP Certified, SIP, which stands for Sustainability in Practice. And on their website, you can see if your vineyard or winery aligns with their criteria, and then you'll be able to say that you are SIP certified. So wrapping things up today, as I mentioned, I'll be happy to share this presentation. All the links are clickable, and you can access the Vine Balance Workbook, as well as the Midwest Fruit Pest Management Guide and the Production Guide for Organic Grapes, where I gathered a lot of the information for today's talk. And with that, I'd like to say thank you, and thank you so much for joining us for today's virtual sessions. And with that being said, I think we may turn it over to Eric for a talk about bird control strategies.
All right. Thank you, Miranda. I appreciate you guys taking the time to let me talk today a little bit about bird and bird control. I'll give you a little bit of background of myself. I started out in the bird pest management industry over 20 years ago, specializing in keeping birds out of and away from any commercial application throughout the entire country. So going to use a little bit of that background for this presentation today. As I go through it, feel free to put out any questions, raise your hand, anything like that. I'll go through it kind of fast, but just kind of briefly touch on everything today for you guys. So bear with me 1 second here while I pull up my presentation and we will get going. So I work for Bird Control Group right now. We offer a laser service, but we also offer the ability to help out with any pest bird problems that you may encounter, both in agriculture and commercial applications. So today, today's goal is the overview of bird control for consideration to help protect yourself against crop damage. So we want to take a look at it like we take a look at integrated pest management for insects. We want to do the same, very similar approach for birds. And through this, we'll go through some control measures. And then at the very end, if you guys have any questions, feel free to certainly ask them, like I said, at any point in time with that. So moving forward, some things to consider when we're looking at pest bird problems is one is going to be the migration patterns. So in migration patterns, if we look here, you guys are within in the Mississippi Flyway, there's over 325 species of birds that will be migrating through that area from Canada all the way up through Mexico. So it's something to take into consideration when your crop is going to come into harvest, that you need to understand what kind of birds that you're going to be dealing with and some of the control measures that may work more effectively than others for those specific bird species. The other thing to also take into consideration as the environment continues to change here is the drought. Sometimes that if you're seeing drought in the southern region as that the birds migrate north, if the harvest is later on in the summer or into the early fall, you may see some drought down south, which will push the birds up there sooner than anticipated. And your fruit may or crop may not be ready for harvest yet, but those birds are looking for a food source and will certainly attack your crop maybe earlier than you're normally seeing them or accustomed to seeing them coming in. So it's something to take into consideration, again, with going through this integrated pest bird problem, or solution, I should say. And also the other thing to consider is when you're going after and trying to protect your crop, understand the area around you. If you start to take away that food source, is that the sole food source in the area for those birds? So if we say, look, I have 10 acres of grapes here. If I protect my crop, where are those birds going to go? Because if they can fly maybe 5 miles away, even a mile away from where they're at right now, it's going to be much easier to mitigate that bird problem, as opposed to that is the only source in the area. And we see that sometimes out in California and things like that, where the vineyards are through those valleys and that's the only source of food as they go along. So those type of cases are much more, you need to be much more aggressive with bird control. So like I said, there's the 325 million birds come through there. Of that, if we take a look at these three birds, these three are more common birds that we get calls or causing problems with a lot of crops. As you can see, there's 750 to 1 billion of these three birds combined, causing over $150 million worth of crop damage. That is given from Cornell University and through the USDA, based off of numbers up in New York. But this is across the board. You can see it's a significant problem. May not be considered that much in the small portion, and not all farms deal with it. However, on a larger scale, $150 million worth of food damage is pretty extensive. So if we're talking about the integrated pest management for birds, some things to consider is if you're looking at an organic farm, not all birds are bad for the farm there. If you look at bluebirds, for example, or the cliff swallows, you can put up some bird houses out there that are conducive for the bluebirds to live in. They will start controlling help with the insects in the area, and certainly reduce the amount of insecticide potentially that you would need to use. The cliff swallows, barn swallows, most of you, if you have them, you know what I mean. They will build those nice mud nests up in the eaves. While they are fun to watch, and that when they get into nesting, they will become extremely aggressive and start attacking. They're just trying to protect their nest. But when you're out in the field and mowing and things like that, they're actually flying behind you as you kick up the insects. So while it may seem like it may be a nuisance, they're actually a very good bird to have. Now, on the other hand, if we're looking at it, the other thing that when it becomes a nuisance problem for us, so we want to take a look at, in this slide presentation, I'm going to walk through several different applications that some of you guys may have already used, maybe not have been so successful, but hopefully I can give you some pointers as to some things you can use in the future. and maybe combine all of them together to give you better results for the birds. So when we talk about the multi-sensory, so you have scent, there's different scent applications, methylmethylene, things like that, sound, your cannons, all that. If we start combining them, maybe at one point in time you used one, you said, man, this worked great for the first week, and then the birds got accustomed to it. Well, there's some other things that we can maybe look at that can help with that. Or you say, hey, look, I put streamers up, they work great, and then now the birds are accustomed to them. So through this, we want to try to build a whole bunch of, use a bunch of tools in your tool shed, basically, to create a very unfavorable environment. The idea for us is to see and create that a food source that is undesirable for the birds. So if it's taking them or they're exerting more energy than they're gaining from going in there, that will repel them from the area and hopefully in a short amount of time recognize a new food source. And the other aspect of it is timing is everything. So we need to understand when you start to see, as they call the scout birds, you'll start seeing a couple birds coming in. At that point in time, that's when you should have already had something in place. So you want to try to plan ahead of time, maybe 2 weeks to a month prior to when you normally would anticipate seeing the birds, to start thinking about putting up some of your bird control products. So if we look at these, as you can see, and I like to say there's no silver bullet with bird control. If you look at this chart, now granted it's from New York, but it's a nice highlight of the different approaches that you can take for bird control. You can see straight across the board, none of them are 100%. So by adding, maybe it's netting, we add a visual sensory, and we add also an audio sensory. By combining all three of them, we start to increase the chances that we're going to be able to move those birds and be effective at a long-term solution for us. So if we start out with propane cannons, I'm sure some of you, or many of you may have already been around them or know what I mean by that. But the nice thing about these things is they're relatively inexpensive. So between $200 and $500, maybe even $600 for the nicer ones, you can get these cannons, these propane cannons. Fairly easy to install. You go out, you put the propane cannon up, you install the propane and set it up and let it go. So it's very easy as an aspect of installation wise, very inexpensive. But the bad side of it is that it's a very loud, annoying noise. And in some cases in municipalities, it may be not allowed because it disrupts the neighbors. So the other problem with these are that it could be a fire hazard. So if you're not getting the irrigation down or you're not getting the right amount of rainfall, that it could become a fire hazard for you. And the other aspect of it, and if you've used these before, is you're going to see the bird habituation. Now the birds will habituate like if your house was right aside of a train station, the train comes in, you're living there for about 2-3 weeks, and you don't hear the train anymore. From there, you kind of just get used to it. Your neighbor comes in and is like, man, I can't believe you live right by the train tracks here. How don't you hear that? That's how the birds perceive a propane cannon. It's the noise that they're so used to. And what you can do to improve using with the propane cannon is to take that and move that around your fields, maybe every 2-3 days. So now the birds are hearing that sound, but they're not associated specifically to that area. So conditioning them that there's this loud noise there that may scare them away. It's one more way. If you have this, there's another way to try to use it to improve your bird mitigation. The next one with this is bird bangers. So they sound like a bottle rocket going off. The nice thing about these is they're pretty easy to deploy. The birds react instantly, very much like the propane cannons do right out of the gate. And it's very little habituation. Now, why I say very little habituation with this is because the birds never know and don't get used to when that's going to go off. The person that's shooting that off can control that. So the nice thing is you can say, okay, you start out a perimeter, and the birds come in that one evening and they get to a certain point and you shoot it off. The next night you expand that out. So every day you continue to expand that area out as the birds come in, and you can start to change their patterns. What you see is the misuse of this is people just go out and they'll just shoot them off, scares the birds off, but then they come right back in. So you're not creating a barrier for those birds to recognize that if I come in that area, it's going to go off. So the other bad side of it is very labor intensive. You've got to be out in that field and you've got to be aggressive with these bird bangers. You have to sit in front of that bird as they come in. Depending on where you're at, the type of crop you have and the type of birds you're seeing, you may need to be out there all day long trying to use these. So it's very difficult, labor intensive type of product, but is effective in used in the right manner. The next one is the bird squawk boxes. Now I put this one up. I'm not talking negatively on this product by any means. This was a nice display of the bird squawk boxes. Some of the pros are they're very easy to deploy. Just most of them, I think some of them you can use on solar. Others just require a regular plug-in, very low maintenance. You have the speakers and you can take it and it's very mobile. The bad thing about this, it's very similar to the propane cannons, is the birds get habituated to that sound specifically in that area. And the other problem is depending if you're in a valley, your terrain, things like that, the sound necessarily doesn't carry so far. So you're very limited on coverage. Now, if you have this device or somewhere derivative of it, what you can do to improve your performance of this is to go ahead and take this and move it around just like you would move the propane cannon. By doing that, again, it's creating those sounds in those areas that the birds are not accustomed to. The only challenge that you may face is there's different settings with certain manufacturers on specific species of birds. So make sure that if you have one of these, that you're sending out that distress call for that specific species of birds. Otherwise, it may become an attractant to those other birds that they recognize that there's a sound like that, and it'll actually attract them into the food source or your fields. Next is the chemical aspect of things. So you have a couple of chemicals that will definitely disperse the flock. It's relatively inexpensive, pretty, for the most part, pretty easy to deploy. And what happens with most of these is the birds consume the grain. In this case, I'm showing corn, but there's mixed grains, things like that, that they will consume. Once they consume it, they emit a sound to the other birds that it's really bad food. The nice thing is it covers about 1/4 of a mile radius per application for these. So it's a very effective tool. But some of the challenges is when you're using this is that depending on the crop you're growing, you have a competing food source there. So gaining bait acceptance may sometimes be difficult. So it might not be really the right application for, say, a vineyard versus a cornfield. Those type of things you have to take in consideration when you're using some of these products. The other downfall is that some of these chemicals will have an adverse reaction to the birds, and you will cause some harm to some of the birds that are already sick. Not all of them, but some of the older sick birds will cause some problems for those guys. So that's just something to consider with that. It is an option. Again, throwing these out there just to kind of go through everything. The next one is going to be methylene. This product here is called Avian Control. There's several different products out on the market. It uses methylene, which is a grape extract. It's a natural occurring chemical. It can be found in Concord grapes, lemons, strawberries, oranges. There's a variety of fruits that naturally produce this. The nice thing is it's pretty easy to apply. You see some orchards in that using that. Well, they'll come through, backpack sprayers, spray across the trees. This will repel the birds. So the methylene works as the birds inhale it. That nerve goes right to their brain, sensing them that it's bad food there. So it automatically works to disperse the flock. The challenges with this is that it may change the flavor profile of some of your product. So while it will protect it, it also may change and give you undesirable flavors in your crops. So the other aspect of it is as well is because it's water soluble. When you spray it on, if you have irrigation or you have rain, it will wash off and be a lot less effective. So it'll require multiple treatments to maintain that effectiveness. Next one is netting. Netting is the only 100% exclusion option that is out there. It can be very, very effective at keeping birds away, but it also can cause a lot of problems for you, as you may be aware of. And you know, the vines and that have some problems with any of the insects or anything, you need to go in there and work on getting in and getting workers up underneath the netting may be challenging. Rolling it back, putting it back on, those type of things. It's labor intensive. And some of the other problems that you see with birds on netting is they will actually flock up and land on the netting, pushing the weight down, and then they sit on top of the net and peck away at your grapes or blueberries or strawberries, whatever you may have under the netting. The one way you can control that and increase your chances of reducing the bird pressure with the netting is by introducing a cable frame system, and around the bushes or the vines, come out maybe 2 feet away from the growth and go up another 2 feet above it and run cable frame and kind of do a canopy up over top of the area you want to cover. This will reduce the amount of area that they can get to the vines or to the fruit, and really will reduce the amount of activity that you'll see, the bird activity in those areas. Maybe a little bit more expensive, a lot more expensive to put up the cable frame system, but you can certainly use that year after year. The only downside is probably going to have to buy a little bit more netting to accommodate for that. So some other things that we're probably all exposed to if you've been doing or trying to deter birds in your fields a little bit. So we have the mylar tape, scarecrows, reflective owls, spinners, the streamers, and then lasers. And I'll go over lasers here in a minute, but these all rely on the UV rays. And why is UV rays important? Because a couple of factors. Birds see in 4 different cones of spectrums of light. And that UV spectrum will be flashing at them. So as they're flying along, they're getting different things coming at their eyes, which interferes with their ability to understand where they're flying. The downfall with them being able to see UV rays is that certain fruits, as they go into veraison in grapes, for example, they will produce a UV coating to protect them from the nice sun. But it's nice and warming and inviting to the birds, so they know where to come to find the nice, fresh fruit. The other thing to consider with birds that's very unique is the magnetic fields. They're drawn to those magnetic fields. So as they go through their migratory path, that's how they know that that's a food source for them. So as we go and develop a program, like, you know, we're going to put up the cannons, we're going to put up some netting, we're going to put up a laser, we're going to put up streamers, whatever that may look like for you, we need to change not only their behavior there, but understand and get that into their memory that there's another food source nearby. So next year, as they come through their migratory path, they bypass your farm and they go over to the next available food source over there. So now I'll talk about lasers a little bit. So lasers are new technology, not necessarily new, but newer technology, I should say. It works as the birds, you and I see that beam, the birds see the whole spectrum of light coming towards them. So we get a reaction from the birds like it's a predator coming towards them. So that's how the birds react. These are some industries that we use it in. As you can see, there's several of them in here that would traditionally do netting. which are replacing them with lasers. Sweet corn fields is extremely challenging. I mean, there's not really a lot you can do considering the size and the crop value. It becomes very challenging on control measures that you can do, but we do use with the sweet corn, and again with the apple orchard, same thing. Very expensive to do many control measures there. So the nice thing, the difference between the visuals for the scarecrows and all them, they all rely on the sun for UV light. The lasers actually can operate 24/7. So they add constant protection to the fields. So the laser, as you can see, 10 to 20 acres, it certainly helps with the overall cost when you start dealing with that. Anything below 5 to 10 acres really gets a little expensive for a laser. So it's not always the best option in that type of situation, but larger areas, it's much better ability or capabilities in those type of environments, also cost effective. So the key here, I have a laser there, but that's not really the laser. So the key is the timing is everything. And to be effective and have an effective control program in place, timing is everything. So again, you want to really try to get your products, whatever they may be, out 2 to 4 weeks before the fruits or your vegetables come into harvest. If you're going to start seeing those birds, if you know that time, start thinking about, this is when I need to get any of the deterrents out there. And really, you should start to see in the first year, if you're very aggressive with this, you should start to see about 70, 80% a yield or reduction in bird activity and an increase in your yields. So to kind of just wrap it up, again, there's no single product that is going to offer you 100% bird exclusion or bird repellent. No matter what anybody says, it's just not the case, and it's been proven scientifically. So adding to your products, whatever you have in your barn, toolbox, whatever it may be, get that back out, start integrating multiple things. Remember, if you're using the sound devices, to kind of move them around the farm so that you're creating that environment that those birds just don't want to be here. You know what? It's easier for them to fly aside of you than right there. It's easier for them to get the food and not be disturbed. So create that multiple layer of confusion for them. Again, being proactive. Think about it now. You guys are taking the class now, maybe next month or even the following month, as you start to go into seeding, start thinking about, what am I going to do for birds? You think about that when you're talking about insecticides and pesticides, also take that into consideration when you're talking about birds or thinking about birds. And if you already have a bird problem, the thing to do is be very, very, very aggressive. So throw everything that you have out at them the very first year, because once you change that feeding behavior, that's when you're going to start to see the increase in your yields and the decrease of bird activity throughout the farm. I'll open it up for any questions, and I'll leave my information here. If I went too fast with something, or you have some questions you don't want to ask in front of the audience here today, feel free to reach out to me. Hopefully shared enough information that you guys will be pros at taking care of your bird problems this year.
Eric, you didn't mention anything about sounds from birds of prey. Is that kind of in the same thing with the bird sounds in distress?
Yeah, so in those sounds, the birds of prey definitely would be in some of those devices. It depends what manufacturer you go through. They're going to have the birds of prey as well as the option for the bird-specific distress calls.
It looks like in the chat we've got a question about, do you know of a source for cable frame designs?
Well, it's going to be up to you, because unfortunately it's going to be site specific. What I would recommend is getting your Schedule 40 poles and take some stainless steel aircraft cable. If you look it up online, you can find some 16th-inch stainless steel aircraft cable that's more than sufficient for what you'll be stringing across. And then your netting can be probably purchased at any of your local trellis supply companies. They'll be able to help you out with most of that stuff. If you're on the West Coast, I'd say call Jim Supply, because I think they have pretty much everything. But in the Midwest, I'm not sure who the supplier is out there.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. It looks like Austin Ferguson is raising his hand. Go ahead, Austin.
Yes, how about increasing the amount of hawks or owls or any predators like that of the birds?
So if you have the opportunity to increase the bird population by introducing the hawks or owls or falcons, it certainly would be encouraged. They are very expensive if you become a falconer to purchase them. So I'm not sure on cost, what it would be like to try to introduce those. They are also great at getting the wildlife out of the farm as well. So your voles, snakes, things like that, that would also cause some problems in your fields. If you could get your hands on some of those, that would be a great option. But if you're looking at like the plastic owls and the plastic hawks and things like that, they really tend to have very little, if no effect, even if they have the bobbling head. You may see a little bit of reaction the first day, maybe even the first week, but after that, the birds get accustomed to it not moving.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. And the experience I've had in vineyards in Indiana, I know a lot of folks were really struggling with bird control, so I couldn't think of a better person than you to give that talk. Thank you for your time. Awesome. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Elizabeth Long, who is an entomologist here at Purdue, and she's going to be giving us an update on the spotted lanternfly here in Indiana. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you, Miranda. Hello, everyone. I was going to say, I don't even know what happy was. Good afternoon. I'm going to try to keep the momentum going here. I have to say I learned a lot from Miranda and also Eric. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about an insect that you've all very likely heard about, the spotted lanternfly. Okay, so this is the insect of interest in our area and also, of course, in Pennsylvania and surrounding states. So I just wanted to provide an update for the audience about this insect. I know there's a lot of concern, a lot of things that are still that we're still learning, and research is ongoing. So I kind of have this talk focused on grapes, but I will comment on some other crops for those who might be interested. And just to make sure we're all up to speed about this insect, why it's so timely right now. The spotted lanternfly was officially detected in Indiana, way down here in the heel of the stocking, if that's the right word, in Switzerland County. And so since July, the Department of Ag here, the invasive species group, and with the Indiana Department of Ag, they've all been working together, really connecting with a lot of folks in Pennsylvania that, of course, know a lot more about this insect because that's where it showed up first. So if you're interested in or want to stay up to date in terms of what's going on with spotted lanternfly, what we're learning, what the action is against this insect right now in Indiana, you can visit this link, which hopefully is still updated because I just realized I didn't click it before this presentation, but this is the place to go to get information local to Indiana. So I should say that they found the insect there on some trees in a pretty dense wooded area. So it's not like it's everywhere. It's not like we're still trying to learn more about the size of the population and those kinds of nitty-gritty details. So really what I want to do today is give you all an opportunity to get an update on what we know and just make you aware and empower you on what you can do so that you don't need to freak out right now. So with that, I have a quick poll question, and this is really just to help me get a sense of what you all are interested in. And I don't know if someone can launch the poll for me or if I need to do it. I'm not able to see the poll, but it's a question about the kind of basic questions you might have about spotted lanternfly. So it looks like this is a different question. This is about root knot nematode. Oh, I think I can change it. I'm going to. Today's the 17th. Question 1. Okay. So I just launched it. Hopefully everyone can see this. The question that I'm asking that I'd like your feedback on what topics about spotted lanternfly are you most interested in learning more about? And this is one of the questions. You can choose all that apply. I'm going to touch upon all of these actually in the presentation today in 45 minutes or less. So this will just kind of help me get an idea of what you're interested in knowing more about. So as our knowledge evolves, I can prepare a more nuanced presentation in the future. So I'll let this go for a little bit longer. 32 responses so far. It seems like a lot of people are interested in the potential to damage crops, which is definitely the question I would have. Okay. We still have a few responses here. I'll give about 10 more seconds for anybody who might want to respond to the poll. So as it shakes out now, out of 40 responders, it looks like potential to damage crops is at the top of the list, followed by research updates on management practices, and then how to identify this insect and how to report a suspected sighting. So, okay, awesome. Thank you all for those responses. I will keep track of those, and that will inform my presentations in the future. I'm going to end the poll now. Okay, and I'm going to move forward with an outline about the presentation that I have for you. And I mentioned this already, but I'll kind of be focusing on grapes in the presentation today, but I will be generally covering the life cycle and biology of this invasive insect, its damage potential, current management efforts, and these are mainly going to be research updates exclusively from Pennsylvania, where they unfortunately have a lot of these insects and they're dealing with a lot of the challenges. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to learn from that and be prepared as things move forward with the infestation and the invasion of this insect in Indiana. And then I'll wrap up with hopefully some positives, what you can do to prepare and how you can help stop the spread of this insect. Okay, so the spotted lanternfly, everything you need to know, just the basic facts. So this is a plant hopper, and entomologists like me get pretty excited. You don't see a lot of kind of large plant hoppers like this that are kind of showy and pretty, even though they're a huge pain. So this insect is native to China, India, and Vietnam. It was first reported invasive in South Korea in 2004, and then first in the United States in 2014 in Pennsylvania. And since 2014, it has spread to 34 Pennsylvania counties and 12 US states. And there may actually be an extra one in there now, or I should say plus or minus one. So really what I want to emphasize here with this spread is that this is something really, really critical we can all do to help manage this insect. Be aware of how it spreads and what to look for so that we don't just keep moving it around unintentionally. And along those lines, how has it been able to move so quickly and spread? It's likely through accidental movement, through trade, also just shipping containers, and it's an excellent hitchhiker. So again, this makes it challenging for us to manage this insect, but it's also a positive for us because if we're aware, we can do something about reducing the spread. Oh, I should mention up here, I have Kansas in italics because this insect showed up in a 4-H student's insect collection and it was dead. So there are no other instances that we know of that spotted lanternfly was found in Kansas, but everyone's panicked because this I think it was a high school student found it or presented it in his insect collection. So TBD on that. So that's why that's in italics. A positive I want to emphasize for those of you who don't know this already is that spotted lanternfly is not a danger to you or me, your children, your pets. It does not bite or sting. So if your dogs eat it, or cats that are running around in the yard, you don't really need to be worried. So at least it's not something that's going to be painful to us. The real problem of this insect is really its potential to damage our crops. So why do we care about spotted lanternfly aside from the fact that it's this invasive insect that's spreading quickly? Just a little bit about the insect. It has these piercing, sucking mouth parts. So this like needle-like or straw-like mouth parts, and they use that to tap into plants, not necessarily the fruits, although there is some evidence of feeding. It seems they prefer to feed on the plants themselves, the stems, the branches, and they're basically making their living sipping on sap. So they can attack a wide range of host plants. I'm just listing the ones that here that there's some evidence that we should be concerned about this insect in terms of their potential to damage the crop. So grapes is right at the top of the list. Hops, some stone fruits, mainly peach and apple, oh, I have that here, apples, I guess stone fruits or peaches, and also pine trees specifically, but also nursery trees. So the big issue with this insect, the nymphal stage and the adults, they aggregate in these large groups. And by aggregate, I mean they just group together kind of like Japanese beetle style. And they just feed on these plants so excessively in these groups that they can cause a lot of plant stress. And so that leads to wilting, dieback of the tissues that these insects are actually feeding on, and even death in the case of grapevines. And there's also a kind of a secondary effect of the infestation of these insects. They're sucking a lot of plant juices, and it's all coming out the back end in this liquid waste that's called honeydew. And that falls on the surface of surfaces of leaves, plant surfaces that need to get sunlight to photosynthesize. So that causes a problem. I've heard from growers in Pennsylvania, or I should say my colleagues in Pennsylvania, that they're excreting so much of this waste. It's just falling on porches, it's falling on chairs out in the backyard where you might want to enjoy a nice evening around a fire pit or campfire. So they're really a big nuisance as well. They're really reducing the quality of life for us in our backyards, but also damaging plants with this feeding. And then the secondary issue of the mold growing on their liquid waste. So this is just an image of one of those aggregations or the big groups that I mentioned of spotted lanternfly feeding. And hopefully you can see from this image how they have the potential to overwhelm these plants, and again, causing these symptoms and hardships on the plants themselves, the oozing of the plant sap, wilting of the tissues that have been fed on, and then dieback. And so I use this image here again because it's a grapevine. This is the one commodity that we know they have the potential to cause a lot of damage, and there's a lot of concern. And so I'll just point out here, and you're probably seeing this, that they're not really feeding on the berries. So our concern is really the impact that they're having on the vine and its longevity. So I just quickly, I included this is a new slide that I included just last night to answer the question that some of you had about what other specialty crops or commodity crops might be vulnerable. And I just want to mention that this is the results I'm going to share here, or really kind of just brief overview, is based on ongoing research at Penn State. And they're evaluating some key things: spotted lanternfly survival on some hosts or other specialty crops, and their damage potential. And these are the result of no choice studies. And what I mean by that is they're taking adults, they're taking mature nymphs of the spotted lanternfly, they're caging them on a plant, and they're forcing them to feed. So they have no other choice to feed on something else. It's this or nothing. So that I just want to share that to provide some context for you about the results I'm about to share based on what Penn State researchers have found. So they focus their evaluations on avocado, fig plants, and also hardy kiwi. And this is based on a survey they did of growers and stakeholders in Pennsylvania, asking them, what are you most concerned about? And these were the plants that came to the top of the list. So they placed mature nymphs of these spotted lanternflies on potted avocado and fig plants, and they left them there for 16 days. And they found that about 95% of mature spotted lanternfly nymphs, and these are the oldest nymphs, kind of the pre-adult stage, 95% of them were able to survive. Now, they did not evaluate whether these plants were killed by their feeding because it wasn't that type of study. But I just want to point out that researchers state that this level of survival, 95%, I mean, that's pretty high. That this is equivalent to their survival on the preferred host tree, which is the tree of heaven. For those of you who don't know, this is a common weedy tree, and I'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation. So this is the preferred tree that they feed on, and 95, or I should say 99% of nymphs and adults would survive by feeding on this tree. So 95% survival after feeding on avocado and fig is pretty high. The same kind of study with hardy kiwi plants, they found that roughly 94% of mature nymphs and 77% of adults, if we round up, survived on these plants, again, on the actual plant tissue, not any fruits, after 8 days. So based on these kind of shorter term studies that they did, they are saying, or the suggestion now is that these spotted lanternflies can survive on these plants. So we would consider hardy kiwi, avocado, and fig as potentially viable hosts for these insects. But that does not mean they could survive the entire life cycle, because that wasn't the focus of the study. It doesn't necessarily mean they are damaging these plants. So a couple of other plants that might be surprising that to you that they evaluated are cucumber and hops. and also hemp and raspberry or brambles more generally. So I just want to mention that these studies on these particular crops, they actually did look at the effects on the plant or the crop itself. So here we can see, generally speaking, high survivorship of mature nymphs again on cucumber and hops, respectively. But and they found some evidence for decreasing yield, particularly on cucumber. Very, very slight evidence for decreased yield in hops in terms of the cones. I think that's what they're called, that are harvested to make beer. But more research is needed. And I have actually the link down here to the website where you can find the blurbs that they share. There's a lot of information. It's very, very good stuff, but too much for me to include here. So I just wanted to hit an overview. So when they looked at hemp and raspberry, they found significantly less survivorship of these mature nymphs. So 32 to 43% of nymphs survived after they were forced to feed on hemp. 52.6% that were forced to feed on raspberry actually survived. And they didn't report any damage from hemp or raspberry, but did want to comment that some folks are seeing, it's not uncommon to see groups of these spotted lanternfly nymphs feeding in low numbers on raspberry, particularly wild brambles, and also hemp that growers are growing in the area. So that was a lot of information there. Hopefully that made sense. So just wanted to touch upon these key other specialty crops that at least researchers at the university or Penn State University have evaluated in terms of their vulnerability to spotted lanternfly feeding and the damage potential. So with that, I'll move on and talk about the biology and life cycle of this insect. Really, this is going to be an image-heavy portion of the presentation, so hopefully you can sit back and enjoy these nice photos. So the life cycle, in a nutshell, don't expect anyone to remember this in detail, but hopefully you'll remember that there are kind of three key stages that you can look for. So the eggs, and this is arguably, actually not arguably, hands down, the most challenging life stage to spot. They look like, well, I'll show pictures next, but it's not easy to spot this. And this is how we think they're moving from state to state, accidentally on all kinds of equipment, maybe wood, maybe stone that has been shipped or ordered for different things. So the eggs are going to be present October through June, and they are hard to see. That's what I'll leave it as. Then when those eggs hatch, you will see 4 different immature stages. And from one of these to the next, these are called instars. And instar is just a fancy or nerdy entomologist term for immature. So there's going to be the first instar. This will be the smallest, and then they'll get bigger and bigger as time progresses. And you can see the first instars based on what we know in Pennsylvania. They will be present from May to June. Then you'll see the next largest size from June to July. Then you'll see that third largest instar also between June and July. And then July to September, you're going to see the largest 4th instar. So I'm going to say that this 3rd and 4th instar are the 2 that are likely to be most visible to you on the plant. If you're walking out and taking a look in your vineyard, just on your property looking for this insect. They are flightless, so they don't have wings. And some people say they kind of look like stink bugs. I guess I could see that. I'll show some pictures on the next slides, but the coloration of these insects is going to be different. And I think pretty obvious, although I am an insect nerd. So I'll show pictures and then you guys can all decide for yourselves. And then that 4th instar is going to complete its development and basically molt out of this wingless body form into the adult. And you're going to see these July through December. And then the females will begin laying eggs September through December. And so I'll show again some images and talk more about this, but I think it's fair to say you will not see other insects that look like this on plants in the adult stage. So if there's anything you suspect is spotted lanternfly, please report it. And I'll provide some tips for how to do that later in the presentation. Okay, so just some more images here in terms of scale. These are those 4 nymphal instars that I mentioned, the smallest, followed by the next, getting older as we move here from left to right, and of course growing larger. They're going to range in size from about 0.5 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters from the tip of the nose to the end of the abdomen here. The adults here relative to someone's finger, you can see this is pretty easily visible. From head to the tip of the abdomen, they're going to be roughly 2.5 centimeters long. And something interesting about this group of insects, the plant hoppers, if they are disturbed, you may see them kind of do this wing flash or flash their hind wings. And this is an effort to them to scare you with these bright red colored hind wings. So, you know, that may deter us, but if you see these insects engaging in this behavior and it has this coloration, it's very likely to be spotted lanternfly. But again, this is all a show on the insect's part. They can't bite you, they can't sting you, they can't even spit or vomit on you like some other insects. So don't be intimidated. Definitely be on the lookout for this insect, and don't be afraid to get close to get a good photo. So in terms of what you might see if you saw them on plants or trees, the adults rest with their wings held tent-like over the body. And I also like to say moth-like. They kind of make a little triangle, little tent on the back of the body. You can see the polka dots here on their wings. And again, when they're opened, they have this bright hind wing coloration, and that's going to be really eye-catching. I'll mention that the adults are pretty poor flyers. They need to make a good trip. They're usually assisted by the wind when they fly, but they are good jumpers, which may not be surprising since they're called plant hoppers. So just another close-up here of the adults on a tree. And this is actually a band, a sticky band that's been placed to try to keep them from crawling up the tree and getting into the canopy. Here's a nicer close-up image of the third instar nymph. So this is the second to oldest nymph that you'll see. So I don't know about you, but I've never seen a black wingless insect like this with these really bright white spots. So I think this is pretty characteristic or diagnostic. But again, if you're not sure and you see something that looks like this, please take a photo and send it to us. And I'll provide that information at the end of the presentation of how to do that. Here is that fourth instar nymph. I'm going to say this is even more showy and even more kind of eye-catching. So again, no wings. It's that little, like funny little snout sticking out there, stink bug-like body, but these bright red colors with the spots and the black. So the eggs, as I mentioned, this is the stage that is hardest to spot, and what we're arguing is the easily missed hitchhiker stage. So these egg masses may be laid on tree trunks, woody stems, even on patio furniture. They've seen that happen in Pennsylvania. So what you're likely to see is this kind of cementy blob, I don't know, chalky blob on the surface. And this is something that in this picture seems pretty obvious, but I would say it's still pretty challenging to spot. You kind of need to know what you're looking for. And if you were to scrape this away, what you'd see underneath are the actual eggs. And they kind of look like pine nuts to me here, not to ruin anybody's lunch, but you know, they're kind of lined up here in order, or you know, lined up by the female. And then this covering is really just to protect the eggs from any natural enemies or predators that might want to eat them. So just to provide some context, here's a photo I pulled from the Pennsylvania Department of Ag. And I think this is a great image because you can see here's a stone of some kind and somebody's pointing to this egg mass. So I don't know about you, but this is going to be pretty challenging to spot. Like, I've never seen one and I feel like I could miss it. So just showing you this picture to give you a sense of what it looks like, but maybe more so to emphasize how easy it would be to miss. So that's kind of the overview of the biology and life cycle of the insect, what to look for. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about management efforts and research updates, again, pretty much from work that's been done in Pennsylvania. So this is pretty wordy. There's a lot of updates. So I just listed here what is going on, and I'll provide a couple of things or more detailed feedback on the next couple of slides specifically about grape. So what are they doing right now to manage this insect? Tree banding, and I think you saw that in the previous photo with the adults crawling up the trees, and also these circle trunk traps, which are a little bit of a newer kind of trap. And the idea of these traps is just to place them on the tree towards the bottom, and this stops the nymphs and adults from crawling up and colonizing the canopy where they're so hard to manage, and also harder to spot. There's been a lot of effort scraping these egg masses from trees and other surfaces, and this is huge because, you know, if you can scrape those egg masses, they're not going to hatch and survive. Also, it reduces the likelihood that they could be spread by movement, depending on what the object is. So there are huge numbers of volunteers going out, scraping these egg masses and burning them. Another big activity is removing the preferred host trees. And this is specifically the tree of heaven. This is a common weedy tree that is in a lot of locations where we see these spotted lanternflies kind of infesting and getting a foothold. So I'll talk more about how to identify this tree. There is also, of course, the use of broad spectrum insecticides to manage this insect. And the good news is that we do have insecticides that are already labeled for use in orchards that will work against this insect, thank goodness. But there are some challenges that remain. And so the key thing is that this spotted lanternfly, the adults in particular, they disperse in groups. So kind of like, I'll draw again the comparison to the Japanese beetles. They're able to fly enough and recruit to a location, and then they kind of overwhelm that location. And so they're always just more coming in waves. And so obviously managing them with an insecticide is challenging because spraying them once doesn't do it. So that's a key challenge, and there's a lot of research still going into that, understanding how to approach area-wide management, let's say of a vineyard, to stop spotted lanternfly from being a big problem. Also, there's the use of organic insecticides for those growers who are, maybe have vineyards or other production systems with this approach. Azadirachtin and things like insecticidal soap, they can be used, but so far, research indicates that the efficacy of these products is pretty poor. And some of that is because these products don't have very good residual activity, unfortunately, so you'd have to be applying them pretty regularly and really physically contacting the insect with a good dose. Also, these insects are pretty large, relatively speaking, so some of these organic products are just, pretty challenging to knock these insects down in terms of penetrating their bodies and also getting good coverage. So that's kind of the overview of all the things that are going on now to manage spotted lanternfly. And now I just want to show a couple of pictures. This is one of those circle trunk traps. This is a newer approach to monitoring the spotted lanternfly nymphs and adults. So basically, you have this mesh that you tie around the tree. And so basically, whenever they crawl up from the ground or wherever they may be dispersing from, they are kind of channeled into this container, which you can see is like I don't know, like it looks like a giant nut container that you get from Sam's or Costco. And so they're forced into this, and then there's an insecticidal kill strip in here. So they're kind of directed or funneled into this container where it makes it easier for you to see them. And then they contact this insecticidal strip where they die, so they can't get out. So this is a benefit on other traps just because it's easy to see who's in there. They can't get out. You don't have to deal with a sticky trap. But some might argue this is still a little bit, it's the handling time on this is pretty high, but it is a good trap. They're showing really good efficacy relative to other types of the circle or the banding tape traps that you would put on a tree. So now I want to talk specifically about a study that was done by the Leach sisters, Ashley and Heather Leach. And they did some really amazing work focused on spotted lanternfly in Pennsylvania and really trying to paint a picture of what the seasonal activity is of this insect on grapevines. Again, because this is the one specialty crop we know is really vulnerable and is being damaged by spotted lanternfly in areas where it's got a foothold. So basically they went through these 7 to 9 Pennsylvania vineyards in 2018 through 2019, and I have the cultivars of the grapes that were planted in the vineyards, and they monitored weekly the adult spotted lanternfly populations. And specifically in 2019, they focused on evaluating daily activity of these spotted lanternfly adults. So all that to say, over this 2-year period, 2018 to 2019, they visited these 7 to 9 vineyards, and they basically watched these spotted lanternflies weekly to figure out what they're doing throughout the day, emphasizing their feeding behavior, mating, and whether they were flying. And again, the goal of all of their work was really to understand when during the season the nymphs and the adults are present. So if we know that, we know when we can kind of time our management. When are they most abundant on the grapevine? So this is kind of an effort to understand, what is it that's attractive about the grapevine? Where are they going to feed? And where you can look. So whether it's the shoots, the cordons, or the trunk of the grapevine. And finally, what time of day they're most active. So some of this may seem pretty simple, but for those of you who are out in the vineyard a lot, you've very surely seen patterns where certain times a day you're more likely to see insects or certain other things than other times a day. It's no different for this insect. So they're really just trying to lay some foundational knowledge of this insect's activity in vineyards. So I totally got busted in a previous webinar talking about some of this work when someone raised a hand and said, well, can you tell me what parts of the grapevine we're talking about here? And I couldn't do it. So I thought ahead this time, and I included a photo of a grapevine. And so just to orient everybody in the audience, especially those who may not know, there were three key regions of the grapevine that the researchers were looking for spotted lanternfly nymphs and adults. One was the cordon, and that's the kind of woody, the next thickest part of the grapevine, as I like to think of it. And then the trunk, which of course I think we all probably are aware of, and then the canes, which are often the part, if I'm saying this, if I'm thinking correctly, are trained, and those could be trained upwards or downwards depending on what kind of strategy you have in your vineyard. So just an image here to orient you all to the cordon, the trunk, and the canes, I should say. So here's what they found. Again, this is a little bit of a wordy slide, but I wanted to hit the high points without taking too long. So they found nymphs on the grapevines in the spring, beginning in May through July. Interestingly, though, the populations were not very high throughout the season of nymphs particularly. Generally speaking, they found fewer than 5 spotted lanternfly nymphs per vine. When they looked at the adults, they found that they showed up later in the summer, and this is not surprising given their life cycle, right? But the adults were infesting the vineyards beginning in August through October, and they actually found peak populations in the vineyards in early to mid-September. So this is kind of when things are cooling down, so it's a little bit interesting, but kind of the takeaway from these 2 points, this kind of goes along with their life cycle where we would expect to see nymphs earlier, and then as the season progresses, begin to see the adults move in. And when they looked at the feeding and dispersal or their movement behavior, they found that generally speaking, spotted lanternfly activity increased throughout the day. So in the morning, and this likely has to do with temperature, insects don't really like to move a lot when it's chilly or cold because they need the warmth to actually stimulate their movement. So they actually found something that agrees with that these spotted lanternfly adults and nymphs, their activity was greatest in the afternoon and evening. So they have a really nice figure that they presented in the paper. And so I just want to walk you through this just to show you how much work they did, but also give you a detailed explanation of where on the vines they found the different life stages over time. So what I'm showing you here is the average number of spotted lanternfly per vine on the y-axis here. And then along the x-axis, you see the month in 2018 and 2019, starting in June, going all the way through November. So this first kind of panel A, this is supposed to represent the first instar nymph. This is the smallest nymph, the one that's probably most challenging to spot. And there's a pie chart here, and you're going to see that it is one of 3 colors. It's either going to be black, which represents only on the shoots, gray, which represents only on the cordon, and then this kind of hashed color that represents only on the trunk. So when we look specifically on the first instar, at the first instar nymph, the baby version, the freshly hatched from the egg life stage of the spotted lanternfly, we see almost 100% of the life stage that we observe is present on the shoots of the grapevines. So, and this happens almost, well, early June. You see this peak and then it kind of slopes off. We don't really see them there anymore. So now I'm going to reveal the rest of the diagram here that they share. So what you want to pay attention to here in column, or I should say letter B here, we're now looking at the second instar nymphs. You can see that they kind of tick up in late June, going into, well, mid to late June, and then their numbers kind of decline off and gets flat. And again, when we look at where these second instar nymphs are likely to be found on the grapevines, it's going to be on the shoots. If we look at panel C here, now we're looking at the third instar nymph. And you can see there's a peak, a big peak in activity, I'm going to say in early July, in terms of their numbers on the vines. But now we start to see a little bit of a different pattern in terms of where they occur on the vine. The majority of them are still on the shoots, but now we're seeing that these older nymphs are moving to the cordons of the grapevine. Interestingly, when we go to the panel D here, we're now looking at the 4th instar nymph. This is the oldest, the pre-adult nymph, so still flightless, but older than the other nymphs. What we see in this chart is that there's still a good proportion of them on the shoots, but we're seeing an increasing proportion of these late instar nymphs occurring on the cordon of the grapevine. And interestingly, there's not a huge number, a change, or we don't see a lot of these late instar nymphs on the vines anyway, which is pretty neat. And that's designated by this kind of low or flat line. We might see what that might even be just as many as one of these late instar nymphs on the grapevine. And then finally, we're looking at panel E here. These are the adults. And you can see their numbers really peak in September, which follows what they shared in their results. That's when the adults really started to recruit into the vineyards. And they are mostly on the shoots, but we're also seeing that they're present on the cordon, and then they're starting to actually appear on the trunks. Almost a quarter of the adult lanternflies detected are now on the trunk of the grapevine, and their numbers remain pretty high from September here through October. And then here I'm just this part of the diagram is meant to highlight the post-harvest activity. So the vines the grapes have been removed. In this case, I'm hoping I'm getting this right. And you see that even after harvest and going into the chillier time of the year, a much larger proportion, more than half of the adults that are found on the grapevine are now on the trunk. So some take-home messages from all of this work they did, chasing these lanternflies on the vines. The knowledge of when during the season and where on the grapevines you can look for spotted lanternfly can really help inform growers' timing of their management efforts. So, should you spend time looking everywhere all the time? This is really an effort on the part of these researchers to help growers be more efficient with their time and improve the timing of activity in cases where management is needed. So the damage, though, I should mention, based on this research, the damage to grapevines is less clear. However, there's some thinking out there that the effects of spotted lanternflies on the yield of grapevines and also their survival, they could be minimal because grapevines are pretty, what's what I'm looking for? They are vigorous. They grow pretty well, certainly established grapevines, and they have the ability to compensate. So anyone who's out doing any type of pruning, knows that the growth of these lateral shoots, that this is something that often has to be pruned off, I believe. I'm not a viticulturalist by training or have much expertise at all, but I know that they are vigorous growers. So it's possible that this lateral shoot growth, you could hang on to those and that can compensate for any kind of negative effect of the feeding by these lanternflies on the grapevines. But post-harvest management of these insects may be more critical. And remember on that previous slide I showed you, more and more of the adults are found on the trunk of the grapevine as the season progresses into the cool part, the chilly or the winter part of the season. And this could be really important because we know that as these, after you've harvested, ideally these grapevines would be, taking those resources and moving them back down to the roots. And so if they're feeding on the trunks of the grapevines at that time and really pulling a lot of the resources away, then those roots may not be getting those resources to store, and that could actually maybe reduce their likelihood to survive the winter, or may have some negative consequence on winter hardiness for these grapevines. So that's work that continues to go on to answer that question specifically. So just talking a little bit about insecticide efficacy research. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there have been studies that have evaluated specifically the knockdown. So that's the, quick knock them on the ground, knock them on their back, and then also the residual activity of insecticides against spotted lanternfly, all life stages, the eggs, the nymphs, and the adults. And so they, one of the Leach sisters and others did these bioassays in the laboratory. They also did it in the field and also semi-field settings, which just means it's in the field, but it may be caged or a little bit more artificial. And they used 1-year-old potted grapevines or cuttings and these 2-year-old potted peach trees. And what they found was that only chlorpyrifos caused 100% mortality of the spotted lanternfly egg masses. And this is pretty, depending on your knowledge of chlorpyrifos, this is a really, really intense, powerful insecticide, but it's also not one that's available for use anymore now in vineyards. So some may be discouraged that this is the only one that caused 100% mortality of egg masses. But I think another way to think about this is that the egg masses, we know they have that kind of hard covering that the female puts over top to protect them. So it's not surprising that you really, really need a nasty insecticide to penetrate and kill the eggs. When we look at other common insecticides, and I just have some classes listed here that many of you likely are already using, things like pyrethroids, the neonicotinoids, the carbamates, and the organophosphates. Insecticides in all of these classes exhibited excellent knockdown activity against the nymphs and the adults after 24 hours and 48 hours. But only two active ingredients, thiamethoxam and bifenthrin. Specifically, these are the thiamethoxam is a neonicotinoid. Bifenthrin is an organophosphate. Wait a minute, maybe that's a pyrethroid. It's a pyrethroid. They offered greater than 50% mortality of adults 14 days after application. So that was a pretty wordy blurb there. So I'll just say that most of these insecticides, the ones that are available to you, are going to do a good job hitting these lanternflies and knocking them down. After 24 and 48 hours, they'll still be kind of what I like to call intoxicated or not able to crawl back up and feed on the plant. However, when it comes to killing them, only these two insecticides, thiamethoxam and bifenthrin, actually killed more than 50% of the adults in a test experiment 14 days after application. So, the take-home message, again, we have products that will work against spotted lanternfly, so please don't be concerned about that. But it will be important, of course, because grapes are edible and delicious, and you may have people coming to your vineyard doing wine tastings and such. It's going to be so important to consider the insecticides that you use, particularly rotating amongst different types of insecticides so we don't get any issues with these insects developing resistance. And also, of course, really being mindful of the re-entry intervals so that, especially if you have a U-pick or, you do the more hospitality side of Vineyard Magic in your system, you want it to be safe for people to come in and actually contact the vines and touch them if that's the thing, or also coming in and picking the grapes to take them home. And also, of course, your own work staff and your employees, their safety is going to be really important. So that's a big thing that we are keeping in mind, or I should say researchers are keeping in mind when doing these studies with insecticides against spotted lanternfly. Okay. So I realize I'm getting a little long on time here. So just a few other things. They are doing other studies with biological pesticides. So entomopathogenic fungi, for example, that kill insects, that work is ongoing. There are also a lot of work on the more ecological side of this insect, focusing on the life cycle. How can we disrupt reproduction? What about native biological control agents? What can we understand about their feeding preferences and their flight behavior so that we can get a bigger picture or holistic approach to managing this insect? So the only thing I want to say on this slide, here in Indiana, even though we don't have a big outbreak yet, it is here. We should all be mindful. The one thing I want to emphasize on this slide is that you do not need to spray your grapevines or your fruit trees for spotted lanternfly yet. I know it may feel like you need to do something to protect your investments, but at this time, unless you're in an active situation where you have the lanternflies on your property, on your crops, please pump the brakes on doing any kind of spraying. This is going to save you time and money, and of course your product. So I am really, really cutting short here. So I just briefly want to talk about what you can do to manage spotted lanternfly. And I guess I can make, if anyone is interested, they can reach out to me and I can provide a copy of this presentation, because I'm going to have to blow through this quickly because I want to respect other people's time. The main thing is, when it comes to what you can do, make sure you check your equipment when you're traveling. Grills, your camper, firewood, large piles of stone that you may be using to decorate or create something new in your backyard. Please check those things for particularly the egg masses and also signs of the nymphs and the adults. Tree of Heaven is their like highly preferred tree source or food source. It's common, it's a weedy tree. This is what it looks like. Please make sure you're familiar with what this tree looks like. If you have them on your property, it's a great place to go look and spot these insects if they're present, because this is where they're likely to first occur. There's also some folks are actually actively going out and removing these trees of heaven from their property. So there is information available. I think I have a link here. Okay. For what it looks like, tree of heaven specifically, and things that can be done to remove it. Sorry, I'm moving through this so quickly, but this is a slide I really wanted to make sure I got to. If you see this insect, it is so important, like hit the lottery important, except this helps us stop the insect from hitting the lottery and ruining, you know, important commodity production and value in our state. Please, please report it. If you are totally wrong, if it's a picture of a cow, like no one's going to complain because we are so appreciative that you are looking and you are being vigilant. So please take a picture of the insect if you see it or something that you suspect to be spotted lanternfly. Mark the location, you know, on a map, or if you can figure out how to do the GPS thing on your phone, that would be great. And please contact your local Purdue County Extension Office or the Department of Agriculture. And I have the number here. And you just say, hey, I think I'm seeing something. And we take those seriously, and they are taking it seriously. Last but not least, if you see this insect, please do not collect it. I know it's tempting to be like, oh, I'm going to collect this. I'm going to take it to him and be like, aha, I have it. Because, you know, we want to know that it's there. But worst case scenario, you pick up the insect, it hops or squirts on you or something, and you panic and you drop it. You end up inadvertently moving it. So please don't collect them and transport them. In any way, shape, or form, just take photos. And the more you can take and the more in focus those photos are, the better it will be. And any images of any life stages or whatever you suspect will be super, super helpful to bring it to our attention and the attention of the Department of Ag here in Indiana. So I just have a final poll question here. I know I had to blow through this last part very quickly. I wanted to ask if basically gauge what you learned from this presentation, if it was helpful to you. And hopefully that poll will go live. I don't know if I can post it myself. There we go. So did this presentation increase your knowledge of spotted lanternfly biology and current practices to manage this insect? I think I probably tried to include a little bit too much here. So forgive me for that, but here is my contact information. I'm happy to provide the slides. I know I had to blow through that last part pretty quickly. I'm happy to take any questions by email. I'll also look in the chat, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker. Let me cancel.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that engaging and informative talk on such a hot topic. We really appreciate you taking the time to let us know everything you know about it. That being said, I'm gonna hand it over to Jeff for the last part of the day, which will be the PARP session.
Okay, is your screen showing the PowerPoint on DriftWatch?
Yes.
Awesome, good. Well, real quickly, I want to talk about DriftWatch, and for a lot of the people that are on this program today, this is something that you should be interested in, because DriftWatch or your plants are a sensitive crop. Those of you that have grapes, for instance, 2,4-D, dicamba, both those plants are very sensitive to, or both of those chemicals are very disruptive to grapes, of course. So what DriftWatch is, it's actually a series of 3 different programs. DriftWatch, which is a specialty crop registry. Bee Check, which is an apiary or bee registry, allows you to map where your bees or your specialty crops are. And then Field Check is the applicator side of it. So people that are applying those dicambas or 2,4-Ds or insecticides or whatever can go on to DriftWatch and look at where you have mapped out your fields that are sensitive. Of course, drift is expensive. A lot of these crops cost more than $10,000 an acre to replace if they're killed. I had a greenhouse up here in Elkhart County that was pretty much wiped out a couple of years ago because of some drift that accumulated inside the greenhouse. It was a mess. And bees, fruits, organic vegetables, organics of any kind. Those things can all be mapped, as well as Christmas trees and that sort of thing. And this is for commercial growers. So a lot of aerial application companies, the right-of-way companies, use DriftWatch every time they go out to make an application. In fact, the labels for dicamba also state that they are to check before they go out and spray dicamba to see if there's any sensitive crops around. So how does this DriftWatch thing work? Basically, if you've used Google Maps before, maybe on your phone, you're looking at the same software. You plot your fields out on Google Earth. The producers, only producers that are producing a commercial crop can do this. So backyard growers who are, quote, organic, cannot map out their stuff. This is for professionals. The applicators then check the website for producers that are nearby, and the applicators can register to be notified if there are any new sites that pop up in their neighborhood or their county. I would recommend that if you are also an applicator, you just map out the townships perhaps where you would be doing applications rather than the whole county, because some counties have a lot of people registered in DriftWatch. To give you an idea, this is what the maps looked like in 2014. You see, this is Indiana with all these little map points, and you can still see some little spots. A couple years later, along comes dicamba, and the state of Indiana got really crowded with a lot of data points there. Along the side here, you see the filters you can put in place for organically grown, certified organic, conventionally grown, beehives, Christmas trees, corn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole lot of different categories you can put on there. You notice up here in this dark region right here on the map, that means there are so many data points here, the map's basically turning dark. And I'll show you what that looks like. This is a close-up of that area. This is where I live, my county where I work, Elkhart County and LaGrange County here. All these ends are organic fields, mainly from the Amish that live up here. We have a lot of Amish growing organically. All those N's and O's. You also see we have quite a few bees, beehives around here. And I'll tell you, this particular map right here was pretty important back in 2019 and 2020, because DNR sprayed for the mosquitoes that pass along EEE, equine encephalitis. Okay. Of course, a lot of our Amish have horses. Encephalitis is a really nasty thing for horses to get. And this area right here that I'm showing you had all those organic farms, none of which wanted to be sprayed. And so the airplanes that did this job, 375,000 acres in total up here in northern Indiana, loaded the maps up, and they could shut the sprayer off over those properties. So if you zoom in on one of those little dots, if you click on it, this one happens to be Myron Miller. Myron lives on County Road 32 here in Goshen. And of course, he's Amish. He does not have a real email address. We have come up with a system for those people who don't have email to fake an email address to put in there. That way that they can still get registered even if they are Amish and don't have email. It's real easy to sign up. It's like anything you sign up for, like a bank account or anything else. You go to the website, driftwatch.org. You'd create a username, put in your email address, create a password, just like anything else. And then you enter information, your first name, your last name, street address, that sort of information. Let me go back here. And then you can ask to be notified about an area that you want, perhaps your county or an area around the area where your farm is. Then you set up the specialty crop. You tell them what it is, whether it's conventionally grown, organic, or certified organic, the dates in which you'll have those plants growing there. And then you go to the maps. And in this case, then you hit a button called Begin Tracing, and you trace out your farm that you want to protect. So you trace that out. Once you finish that, it will send an email to the state chemist's office for their approval. They'll make sure that it's a legitimate farm and not somebody's backyard and so forth. So this is what it looks like after somebody has mapped out in a neighborhood. You see these little red spots here. Apparently they're growing tomatoes. That's what the T stands for there. If you have bees, and a lot of you growers would have bees on your place, you probably want your beekeeper, if you don't raise them yourself, to get their bees mapped out too. I know we've got at least one person that is on the program today that lived just outside the spray zone up here for the Triple E and has bees and grapes and so forth too. After you register for DriftWatch, you will receive an email back that says, thank you very much, and it gives you a summary of your information. If you're interested in more information about this, there's a wonderful young lady named Beth Carter at the Indiana State Chemist's office that manages Indiana's data. So anytime you put a map in there, Beth is going to have eyes on it to take a look at it. It's also a fact that the Field Watch, which is the overall organization of DriftWatch and those other two programs, is based at Purdue University. So if you have any further questions about DriftWatch, as you can tell, I'm a big fan, and I would encourage you to register your farms on that site. That's all for me, Miranda.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks everyone for joining.